Hollywood's golden age wasn't just built on talent and charm. It was built on deals, secrets, and silence. Behind the iconic faces and glittering red carpets, a darker power loomed. From smoky Vegas showrooms to private studio parties, the Mafia's influence crept into the lives of some of the biggest stars of the era. These weren't just actors and singers, they were friends, lovers, and sometimes pawns of men who ruled the underworld. In this video, we reveal 20 legendary names from old Hollywood whose lives crossed paths with organized crime. Sometimes by choice, sometimes by force, but never without consequence. George Raft, Hollywood's gangster who walked with the real ones. George Raft didn't just play gangsters, he knew them. In fact, some would say he knew them a little too well. Long before he became one of Hollywood's go-to tough guys, Raft was growing up on the hard streets of Hell's Kitchen in New York City, a neighborhood known as much for its working-class grit as for the presence of rising underworld figures. Raft's early life was surrounded by men who would go on to become some of the most feared names in American crime. He reportedly had personal relationships with Bugsy Siegel, Meyer Lansky, and others who helped shape the modern mafia. But even as he rose to fame in films like Scarface, 1932, where he portrayed mobsters with uncanny authenticity, Raft never fully left those roots behind. His off-screen friendships with real-life criminals were widely known in industry circles. He was seen dining with known figures, attending exclusive parties where mobsters mingled with stars, and according to multiple sources, occasionally acted as a middleman, or at least a sympathizer, when the underworld and entertainment world crossed paths. Some studio executives were uneasy. There were roles Raft reportedly turned down because they too closely mirrored the lives of his real-life associates. There were also rumors that he intervened on behalf of friends when they faced legal or business trouble. And at least once, he was denied entry into the UK because of his known affiliations, a move rarely seen for a Hollywood actor. Yet Raft was never arrested, and he denied any involvement in criminal activity. To the public, he was a movie star. But to those who knew more, he was a man who walked both worlds, with one foot on the red carpet and the other on a street corner few in Hollywood dared to visit. Marilyn Monroe, surrounded by power, whispers, and the mob's silent reach. Marilyn Monroe's life was filled with fame, beauty, and mystery, but behind the iconography was a woman whose personal world intersected with some of the most powerful and secretive forces in America. While Monroe was never directly tied to organized crime herself, the company she kept and the relationships she formed placed her uncomfortably close to those underworld circles. Her romantic links to both John F. Kennedy and Robert F. Kennedy have been the subject of speculation for decades. The Kennedy family's alleged behind-the-scenes dealings with mob figures like Sam Giancana and Johnny Rosselli have led some to wonder how much Monroe may have known or overheard during her time with them. FBI documents show that Monroe was under observation, and that authorities were concerned about her associations and potential connections to men within the criminal underworld, even if only indirectly. She was also known to frequent Las Vegas, a city where most stages, nightclubs, and luxury suites were operated or influenced by the Mafia. Whether performing or attending events, Monroe moved through an environment carefully managed by men whose power extended far beyond the lights of the Strip. Over the years, numerous books and documentaries have hinted that her sudden and tragic passing may have had more complexities than were publicly known. Though officially classified as a medical event, theories emerged that she had become entangled in political and criminal tensions far larger than herself, the kind of entanglements where too much knowledge, even unintentionally gained, could put someone at risk. Marilyn Monroe remains an enduring legend, but also a symbol of how stardom can draw even the brightest light into the darkest corners of power, secrecy, and influence. Vic Damone, a voice so good the mob stepped in. Vic Damone had a voice that could melt a room, smooth, romantic, and effortlessly elegant. He was one of the most admired crooners of the post-war era, drawing comparisons to Sinatra and selling out nightclubs from coast to coast. But what set Damone apart wasn't just his talent, it was the chilling story that followed him off stage, one that revealed how deeply organized crime had embedded itself in show business. In a candid interview later in life, Damone recalled a moment in his early career that felt more like a movie scene than real life. After pulling out of a club booking he didn't feel right about, Damone claimed he was confronted by individuals associated with New York's underworld, angry that he had backed out of the deal. He said he was taken for a drive, where he was strongly encouraged to reconsider, with consequences made clear. At that moment, Damone's fate might have taken a very different turn. According to his own account, He was spared not by luck, but by a call from someone few would dare to ignore: Frank Costello, one of the most influential mob bosses in America at the time. Costello reportedly told him to let Damone go, calling him a good kid. The incident was never officially documented, but Damone never wavered in the story, and many believed him. Throughout his career, Damone continued to perform at venues in Las Vegas, Miami, and New York, many of which were backed by Mafia money. Though never linked to any wrongdoing, his career, like so many in that era, unfolded within a system where the mob held the keys to the stage. Vic Damone wasn't a gangster. He was a singer trying to survive in a world where the price of saying no could be dangerously high. And in that world, sometimes the right voice, on or off the microphone, could save your life. Lana Turner, glamour, scandal, and the man from the underworld. Lana Turner was the epitome of Hollywood elegance, blonde, poised, and luminous on screen. But her real-life story would become one of the most sensational headlines in the town's history. At the height of her fame, Turner's world collided with a man who didn't belong to the movie business, at least not officially, but to something far more dangerous: organized crime. That man was Johnny Stompanato, a known associate of Mickey Cohen, one of Los Angeles' most powerful underworld figures. Stompanato had a reputation for charm, style, and connections. He entered Turner's life as a romantic interest, but what followed was a relationship filled with tension, public scrutiny, and increasing concern from those around her. Stompanato was often seen accompanying Turner to events and was rumored to be heavily involved in managing her personal affairs. Insiders said he tried to control her career, inserting himself into business decisions and asserting influence far beyond a typical relationship. His presence made many uncomfortable, especially given his background in enforcement work for the LA underworld. Everything came to a dramatic turning point in 1958 when a tragic incident in Turner's home led to a high-profile investigation. While Turner herself was not held responsible, the circumstances launched a media storm that exposed just how close Hollywood had come to the darker corners of organized crime. Although Turner maintained her career in the years that followed, she was forever linked to a story that blurred the lines between stardom and danger. Her involvement with Stompanato remains one of the most famous and cautionary tales of how even the most glamorous lives in Hollywood could be touched by forces far beyond the screen. Sammy Davis Jr. in the spotlight, surrounded by shadows. Sammy Davis Jr. was one of the most dynamic entertainers of the 20th century, a master of song, dance, and comedy who broke barriers and stole every stage he stood on. But his rise to fame happened not just under bright lights, but in the shadows of mob-controlled Las Vegas, where the entertainment world and organized crime operated side by side. As a core member of the Rat Pack, Davis performed regularly at venues like the Sands and Flamingo, casinos known to be operated or influenced by powerful mob families from Chicago, New York, and Cleveland. These weren't just places for glitz and glamour, they were assets in the syndicate's business empire, where performers helped draw the crowds and the profits. Davis's proximity to Frank Sinatra, who had strong alleged ties to figures like Sam Giancana, brought him into that world by association. But his own fame made him a fixture in the Vegas scene, and as a black entertainer during a time of intense segregation, he had a uniquely complex relationship with the city. While headlining shows at top-tier hotels, Davis often faced discrimination, unable to stay in the very places he performed. Ironically, some insiders believe that Davis was treated with more respect behind the scenes by those with mob affiliations than by many in mainstream business or politics. According to various accounts, he was seen as an asset, a performer who brought in big crowds and knew how to keep a low profile offstage. Though there's no evidence Davis was ever involved in anything illicit, his career, like many others of that era, was shaped within a system where who controlled the stage often mattered more than who stood on it. Sammy Davis Jr. didn't just break boundaries in entertainment, he did it while navigating a world where the real power often came from outside the spotlight. Tony Curtis, from the Bronx streets to mob-linked circles. Tony Curtis rose from the grid of New York's working-class neighborhoods to become one of Hollywood's brightest stars. With his sharp features, magnetic screen presence, and charm to spare, Curtis became a household name in the 1950s and 60s. But before the fame, before the red carpets, there was the Bronx, and a childhood shaped by the company he kept. Curtis, born Bernard Schwartz, grew up surrounded by street hustlers, gamblers, and men whose influence extended well beyond their neighborhoods. One of the names tied to his early life? Bugsy Siegel, the notorious gangster who helped pioneer the rise of Las Vegas. Curtis would later claim that his family knew Siegel personally and that he grew up aware of who held power in his community and how they used it. As his Hollywood career took off, Curtis found himself performing and socializing in Las Vegas, at a time when the mob was firmly in control of the city's biggest casinos and entertainment venues. He regularly shared space with Rat Pack members and was seen at events attended by known underworld figures. Some sources suggest that his connections from the old neighborhood gave him a kind of quiet protection, a nod of respect for men who remembered where he came from. Though Curtis never faced accusations of criminal involvement, he never seemed to shy away from his past. In interviews, he often acknowledged the tough environment he came from and the people he once knew. Whether those connections helped him or simply gave him an edge in navigating the rougher sides of show business remains open to interpretation. Tony Curtis lived between two worlds, the Hollywood dream and the streetwise realism of his youth. And for a man who often played charming rebels and fast-talking outsiders, the line between performance and personal history may have been thinner than most realized. Peter Lawford, the middleman between presidents, performers, and power. Peter Lawford may not have been the loudest member of the Rat Pack, but he was arguably the most strategically placed. A polished English actor with aristocratic charm, Lawford wasn't just connected to Hollywood royalty, he married into American royalty. As the husband of Patricia Kennedy, sister of John F. Kennedy, Lawford became a bridge between the worlds of politics, celebrity, and, allegedly, organized crime. Through his close friendship with Frank Sinatra, Lawford found himself orbiting a world where Vegas showrooms and political campaigns quietly overlapped. According to multiple biographies and reports, he was involved, at least socially, in the same circles that included Sam Giancana, the Chicago mob boss believed to have worked with Sinatra to help secure Union votes for JFK's 1960 presidential run. Lawford was said to have played a key role in planning meetings, coordinating appearances, and smoothing communication between the Kennedy camp and Rat Pack regulars. While there's no evidence he personally dealt with the Mafia, he was close enough to be caught in the fallout. When the Kennedys distanced themselves from Sinatra due to his rumored mob ties, it was Lawford who had to deliver the message that JFK would no longer be staying at Sinatra's estate during a California visit. That single act severed Lawford's bond with the Rat Pack. Sinatra never forgave him, and Lawford, once at the center of Hollywood's most powerful inner circle, found himself pushed to the margins. Though he never publicly addressed any underworld associations, Lawford's placement in the Venn diagram of fame, family, and influence made him a central, and ultimately tragic, figure in the quiet dance between Hollywood glamour and mob-backed power plays. Frank Sinatra, the voice with friends in very low places. Frank Sinatra wasn't just a singer, he was a cultural force. A voice that defined generations, a presence that dominated stages and screens, and a personality that seemed larger than life. But alongside the tuxedos, sold-out shows, and political friendships, Sinatra's name was often whispered in the same breath as the Mafia, and not without reason. From early in his career, Sinatra was rumored to be close with influential mob figures like Lucky Luciano, Sam Giancana, and Johnny Rosselli. While he always denied being involved in anything criminal, multiple FBI files and countless reports suggest that Sinatra was more than just acquainted with the men who ran the underworld, he was welcomed among them. In Las Vegas, Sinatra performed regularly at casinos and clubs that were openly operated by mob-controlled interests. He wasn't just an entertainer, he was an attraction who made millions for the people behind the curtain. His presence brought prestige to their venues, and in return, some believe he received support, protection, and favors that helped propel his career at critical moments. One of the most persistent stories involves his alleged role in the 1960 presidential campaign of John F. Kennedy, where Sinatra was said to have helped arrange Union votes with help from Giancana's organization. Though never proven, the idea was so explosive that, once Kennedy was in office, the family began distancing themselves, leading to Sinatra's bitter fallout with both the Kennedys and his close friend Peter Lawford. Then there's the connection to The Godfather. The character of Johnny Fontaine, a crooner who needs mob help to land a movie role, was widely believed to be based on Sinatra. He was said to be furious about the portrayal and reportedly tried to stop the film's production, only fueling the speculation further. Frank Sinatra's legacy as a performer is undisputed. But the question that still lingers is how much of his success came from talent and how much came from knowing the right people in the wrong world. Mickey Rooney, Hollywood's golden boy with a silent guardian. Mickey Rooney was once the biggest box office draw in America. With his boyish charm and boundless energy, he became a defining face of classic Hollywood, a child star who grew up on screen and kept performing for decades. But behind the scenes, Rooney's life was more turbulent than audiences ever saw, and according to long-circulated accounts, he may have had help navigating it from someone with very serious influence, Bugsy Siegel. The story, repeated in several biographies and old Hollywood tell-alls, suggests that Rooney found himself in conflict with a powerful studio figure, a disagreement that escalated beyond the usual backlit drama. Allegedly, it was Siegel, the infamous mobster and architect of a Las Vegas strip, who stepped in to resolve the issue. How exactly he intervened remains unclear, but the implication was that the matter ended quickly and in Rooney's favor. Rooney himself later hinted at having powerful friends who looked out for him. While he never named names and no official link to organized crime was ever established, the timing and the players involved have kept the rumor alive for decades. His frequent performances in Las Vegas, particularly in casinos with known mob ties, only deepened the speculation. He was also a heavy gambler, often in deep with debts, and it's widely believed that at least some of those financial woes were quietly managed by individuals who didn't operate through banks or lawyers. Again, nothing was ever proven, but in the tightly connected world of mid-century Vegas, very little had to be said aloud. Mickey Rooney always projected innocence and enthusiasm on screen. Off-screen, he may have been one of many stars whose survival in Hollywood's cutthroat system wasn't due to luck, but to having the right people watching his back. Robert Mitchum, the outsider who brushed up against the underworld. Robert Mitchum had a look that said, "Don't mess with me," and a career built on playing loners, rebels, and morally gray men. With his sleepy eyes and gravelly voice, he became a Hollywood antihero long before it was cool. Off-screen, Mitchum carried the same energy, fiercely independent, unpredictable, and always surrounded by an air of danger. While Mitchum was never directly tied to organized crime, he moved in circles that frequently overlapped with the underworld, especially in post-war Hollywood, where the party scene often included a mix of actors, musicians, and men who operated outside the law. He was a regular at nightclubs and private gatherings where the lines between celebrity and crime boss weren't always clear. In 1948, Mitchum was arrested in a well-publicized drug raid, a scandal that could have ended his career. But surprisingly, the fallout was minimal. He served a short sentence and returned to acting almost immediately. Some have speculated that quiet pressure was applied behind the scenes, perhaps by influential figures who preferred to keep their favorite actor out of the headlines. Mitchum also performed in Las Vegas, appearing in venues that were known to be mob-managed or mob-owned. While he was more reclusive than many of his peers, he had a reputation for being well-connected and protected in the right places, and for not asking questions when it came to who was footing the bill. What made Mitchum different is that he never tried to play nice. He didn't network, he didn't charm the press. He simply showed up, did the work, and left people guessing. That distance may have been part of what kept him out of deeper trouble. In a time when many stars courted publicity, Robert Mitchum thrived in mystery, and sometimes in Hollywood, that's the best way to survive the company you keep. Joey Bishop, the quiet one in a very loud circle. Joey Bishop wasn't the flashiest member of the Rat Pack, and that may have been exactly why he lasted. While Sinatra and Martin soaked up the spotlight, Bishop played it cool, delivering sharp comedy with a calm demeanor that set him apart. But make no mistake, being part of that inner circle meant performing under the watchful eye of organized crime, whether you wanted to or not. As the Rat Pack's go-to MC and frequent host, Bishop was a regular fixture at top-tier Las Vegas casinos, many of which were openly controlled or financed by Mafia families from Chicago, Cleveland, and New York. Places like the Sands, the Riviera, and the Tropicana weren't just glamorous, they were business fronts for some of the most powerful figures in organized crime. Bishop wasn't known for wild antics or risky behavior. In fact, his ability to stay under the radar likely helped keep him in the game longer than some of his more headline-grabbing peers. But he was in the rooms, on the stages, and at the parties, and that meant he was part of a world where mob presence wasn't a rumor, it was a reality. FBI documents from the era mentioned Bishop's name in connection to various known associates, but there was never any suggestion of direct involvement. Still, proximity alone in those days could mean a lot, and everyone in Vegas knew who really ran the town. Joey Bishop may have been the most understated of the Rat Pack, but he understood how the system worked. You showed up, did your job, and kept your mouth shut. In a world where flash drew danger, staying quiet was a form of survival, and Bishop mastered it. Tony Bennett, a voice for the ages, performing in the mob's backyard. Tony Bennett's voice carried elegance, sincerity, and timeless charm. He wasn't just a singer, he He was a symbol of class, performing for presidents, royalty, and packed audiences across the world. But like so many entertainers of his era, Bennett's career path often took him straight into venues where the Mafia quietly pulled the strings. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, Bennett was a regular performer in Las Vegas, New York, and Chicago, cities where some of the biggest entertainment venues were operated by, or at least tied to, organized crime families. The casinos and nightclubs that hosted top-tier talent like Bennett were often backed by syndicates looking to launder money, influence unions, or simply keep the crowds and cash flowing. Bennett himself was never accused of any wrongdoing. In fact, he maintained one of the cleanest reputations in the business. But he wasn't unaware of who controlled the stages he stood on. In interviews later in life, he acknowledged the reality of the time, saying that you knew who was behind things, but you didn't talk about it. That silent understanding was a survival skill for many entertainers during the mob's peak influence over the industry. While some artists resisted or clashed with underworld figures, Bennett's approach was simple. Keep the focus on the music, show up on time, and stay out of trouble. And it worked. He built a career that lasted nearly 8 decades, untouched by scandal, even while standing in venues run by men whose business extended far beyond entertainment. Tony Bennett's story isn't one of crime. It's one of navigating a system where the backdrop to stardom was often far more complicated than the spotlight ever revealed. James Cagney, the screen's tough guy who faced real-world pressure. James Cagney became the face of Hollywood's gangster genre, snarling, fast-talking, and fearless. Films like The Public Enemy and Angels with Dirty Faces turned him into a cultural icon. But while his characters were fictional, Cagney himself had to navigate real-world tensions with people who didn't just play gangsters, they were the real thing. In the 1930s and 40s, Hollywood labor unions were becoming powerful, and in some cases influenced or outright controlled by mob-affiliated leaders, especially within film crews, projectionists, and theater operators. Cagney, known for standing his ground and refusing to be intimidated, reportedly resisted pressure from those trying to assert control over the studios and their stars. According to Cagney's autobiography and multiple film historians, his refusal to cooperate with certain union demands allegedly led to threats against him, serious enough that George Raft, his real-life friend and a man known to have close connections to organized crime, supposedly stepped in to defuse the situation. Whether it was a conversation, a warning, or something stronger, whatever Raft had worked, and the threats vanished. The FBI took notice of Cagney's name on more than one occasion, mostly due to the political and union tensions of the time. But unlike others who kept quiet, Cagney was vocal about corruption in the industry. He advocated for better working conditions and refused to be swayed by pressure, whether it came from studios or shadowy figures behind the scenes. Though he portrayed gangsters with unmatched realism, Cagney lived by a different code, one of independence, integrity, and backbone. In an era when saying no could have serious consequences, he did, and lived to tell the story. Virginia Hill, the socialite who lived inside the mob's inner circle. Virginia Hill wasn't a movie star, but she was one of the most talked-about women in Hollywood's orbit, and for good reason. With her stunning looks, sharp wit, and commanding presence, she moved easily through high society, rubbing elbows with celebrities, producers, and politicians. But it wasn't just her charm that made headlines. It was her connection to one of the most feared men in organized crime, Bugsy Siegel. Hill and Siegel's relationship was more than just tabloid fodder. She wasn't a passive companion. She was a trusted associate, allegedly serving as a courier for the Chicago outfit, transporting large sums of cash across the country. Her nickname among mob insiders? The Flamingo, a name Siegel would later give to the iconic Las Vegas hotel he helped build. According to investigators and biographers, Hill played a deeper role than most realized. She was smart, connected, and respected, not just by Siegel, but by other figures in the syndicate. She testified during the Kefauver hearings, a major Senate investigation into organized crime, where she famously pushed back against questioning with sarcasm and defiance. It was a rare moment, a woman not only surviving in that world, but staring it down in public. Her lifestyle was lavish. Fur coats, Hollywood parties, European trips, all reportedly paid for through the intricate financial web of mob dealings. While she wasn't part of the film industry, she was closely associated with its stars, especially those who traveled in the same social and Vegas circles. Virginia Hill blurred the lines between companion, operative, and celebrity. She didn't just witness the mob's influence on Hollywood, she lived it from the inside. Elizabeth Taylor, a screen legend at the crossroads of fame and influence. Elizabeth Taylor was the very definition of Hollywood royalty, a global icon with beauty, talent, and a life that unfolded like a movie script. She dominated headlines not just for her films, but for her many marriages, high-profile romances, and friendships with some of the most powerful figures in entertainment and politics. While Taylor herself was never connected to organized crime, her proximity to those who were as kept her name in the conversation. One of those links came through her marriage to Eddie Fisher, a singer who performed in mob-controlled venues and whose professional path crossed regularly with underworld interests. Taylor's later relationship with Richard Burton also kept her in social circles where Rat Pack members and their alleged connections were ever present. She attended events, galas, and parties where individuals tied to the Las Vegas casino world and the Hollywood underworld were known to mix with A-list celebrities. Her longtime friendship with Frank Sinatra further connected her to figures like Sam Giancana, even if only by association. These weren't hidden meetings, they were part of the elite social fabric of the time, where everyone knew who was in the room and why. Despite being surrounded by powerful men with powerful friends, Taylor remained fiercely independent. She was not easily manipulated, and those close to her described her as both intuitive and cautious. Still, in an era where stars often became assets for those operating behind the scenes, simply being in the right place, or the wrong one, was enough to raise questions. Elizabeth Taylor may not have played the mob's game, but she knew how to move through a world where reputations were built in public and protected in private. Eddie Fisher, the crooner who sang in the mob's spotlight. Eddie Fisher had the voice of a generation, smooth, romantic, and radio perfect. In the 1950s, he was one of America's biggest pop stars with chart-topping hits and a carefully polished public image. But behind the ballads and Boy Next Door charm was a career that unfolded on stages operated by some of the most powerful figures in organized crime. Fisher's rise coincided with the mob's deep control over the nightclub and casino scene, especially in Las Vegas, Miami, and New York. He regularly performed in venues known to be backed by crime families, and while many entertainers of the time share that same circuit, Fisher's associations seemed especially consistent. These weren't simply bookings, they were relationships, often arranged by intermediaries with long histories in the underworld. According to several industry accounts, Fisher was reportedly favored by certain mob-connected promoters and agents who helped shape his touring schedule and club appearances. He was never directly implicated in any criminal activity, but his name does appear in law enforcement documents from the era, mostly in connection with business dealings and the venues he frequented. His personal life also kept him in the public eye. His marriages to Debbie Reynolds and later Elizabeth Taylor created headlines that further blurred the line between entertainment royalty and the high-stakes world of power, money, and influence. Eddie Fisher was, by all accounts, an entertainer focused on his craft. But in the world he moved through, talent alone wasn't always enough. You also had to keep the right company and know when to stay quiet. Bugsy Siegel, the gangster who brought the mob to Hollywood's doorstep. Bugsy Siegel wasn't a movie star, but he lived like one. Handsome, stylish, and utterly ruthless, Siegel moved through Los Angeles and Las Vegas with the kind of swagger usually reserved for leading men. And in many ways, he was a star, just not the kind who answered to directors. He answered to the mob. In the 1930s and 40s, Siegel helped expand the reach of the national crime syndicate into the West Coast. He established a stronghold in Los Angeles, where he mingled with producers, actors, and studio executives, blending underworld power with Hollywood's elite social circles. He wasn't just tolerated, he was embraced by many who saw him as glamorous and dangerously charming. Siegel's most infamous legacy came in Las Vegas, where he helped finance and open the Flamingo Hotel, a luxury resort that marked the mob's transition from backroom rackets to corporate-style casino operations. The goal was simple: draw in stars, dignitaries, and high-rolling tourists to a place where entertainment, money, and control all flowed through the same hands. His romantic relationship with Virginia Hill, a known mob courier, only added to his legend. Their high-profile lifestyle, complete with luxury homes, lavish parties, and volatile drama, fascinated the press and terrified business associates. He reportedly counted actors like George Raft as personal friends and was rumored to have helped more than one Hollywood figure out of tight situations. But Siegel's ambition outpaced his allies' patience. As costs at the Flamingo soared and profits lagged, his position within the mob grew unstable. Though the end of his story has been widely covered, what remains is his undeniable role in linking Hollywood glamour to mob control in a way few ever had before or since. Bugsy Siegel didn't just walk alongside Hollywood's elite. He helped reshape the stage they performed on. Dean Martin, the cool crooner who kept quiet around dangerous friends. Dean Martin was the embodiment of effortless charm, the smooth-voiced singer, easygoing comedian, and Rat Pack icon who never seemed rattled by anything. With a cigarette in one hand and a drink in the other, he floated through film sets, stage performances, and Vegas showrooms with the confidence of a man who knew exactly where he stood. And perhaps that's because in certain circles he had protection. Martin performed regularly in Las Vegas during the height of its transformation into America's adult playground, a time when many of the top casinos were either operated or financed by mob families from Chicago, New York, and Cleveland. The venues where he headlined, the Sands, the Riviera, the Flamingo, weren't just luxury destinations. They were part of the Mafia's financial network, where performers like Martin helped bring in crowds and profits. Unlike his close friend Frank Sinatra, who was more openly connected to figures like Sam Giancana, Martin kept his associations quiet. Still, those in the know understood that Martin was trusted, a star who didn't make waves, didn't ask questions, and always delivered. Some biographers have suggested that Martin was seen by certain mob figures as an asset, loyal, professional, and discreet. He wasn't flashy with his relationships, but he showed up in the right places, performed when asked, and kept the party going. That kind of reliability was valuable, especially in a city where the real power sat behind the curtain. There's no evidence Martin was involved in any illegal dealings. In fact, his greatest skill may have been in knowing how to stay just close enough to enjoy the benefits without stepping over the line. He played the fool on stage, but in reality, he may have been the smartest man in the room. Judy Garland, a star among shadows in a city she couldn't escape. Judy Garland was one of the most gifted performers to ever grace a stage or screen. Her voice was unmistakable, her vulnerability authentic, and her fame colossal. But behind the songs and standing ovations was a life marked by instability, and a career that brought her face to face with some of the darker forces operating in the entertainment industry, including alleged brushes with organized crime. In the later years of her career, Garland found herself performing in nightclubs and hotels across Las Vegas, Chicago, and New York, many of which were known to be controlled by mob interests. These venues were often the only ones willing to pay her top dollar during turbulent periods in her career. She needed the work, and the mob needed performers who could draw a crowd. It was a business transaction, and one neither side had much interest in talking about publicly. Some reports suggest that Garland was booked through intermediaries tied to known crime figures, and that she may have even received assistance or protection when dealing with tough promoters or financial issues. She was never involved in anything criminal, but like many stars of her era, she moved through a circuit where the house lights were bright, and the backrooms even brighter in a different way. There are also whispers, difficult to verify but widely repeated, that Garland had romantic ties to individuals with underworld connections. Whether true or exaggerated, the rumors added yet another layer to a public life already filled with pressure, scrutiny, and constant reinvention. Judy Garland's legacy is one of unmatched talent and tragic brilliance. And while her story isn't defined by the mob, it's yet another example of how Hollywood's brightest stars often performed on stages quietly managed by men who preferred to stay out of the spotlight. Jerry Lewis, the comic genius who performed on mob-owned stages. Jerry Lewis was one of the most recognizable entertainers of the 20th century, a comedic whirlwind with unmatched timing, physicality, and flair. From his early days with Dean Martin to his solo career as a performer, filmmaker, and philanthropist, Lewis was a force of nature. But his path to stardom, like many of his peers, often ran straight through venues controlled by organized crime. Lewis was a regular act in Las Vegas, especially during the 1950s and 60s, when the Strip was effectively run by various mob factions. The Sands, the Riviera, the Flamingo, these weren't just showrooms. They were business operations backed by money from the Chicago outfit, the Genovese family, and other syndicates that had a firm grip on the entertainment industry's infrastructure. He performed at these clubs night after night, drawing massive crowds and massive profits. And while there's no evidence Lewis was ever involved in anything criminal, his success, like that of many stars of the era, came with quiet expectations. Keep performing, keep drawing crowds, and don't ask too many questions about who's behind the curtain. Lewis was also close to Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin, both of whom were far more openly associated with figures tied to the mob. By proximity and by profession, Lewis found himself operating in a world where the powerful people behind the scenes weren't studio executives. They were men whose reputations were built in very different arenas. Despite this, Lewis managed to steer clear of scandal. He kept the focus on his craft, and later, his humanitarian work. But he remained a fixture in a scene built and managed by people who valued talent, so long as it knew its place. Jerry Lewis may have been known for making people laugh, but he did so in rooms where the stakes were deadly serious. Behind the glitz, glamour, and golden spotlights of old Hollywood, a different kind of power quietly pulled the strings. These weren't just actors, singers, or entertainers. They were part of a system where influence often came from the shadows, and where success sometimes meant knowing when to look the other way. Some played the game. Others simply survived it. But all of them, in one way or another, shared the stage with forces that shaped not just entertainment, but history. If you found this journey into Hollywood's hidden past as compelling as we did, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more stories from behind the curtain, where fame, power, and danger have always been closer than they appear.